And hello, fourth and long fans. It's your AFL correspondent, Donnie, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another interview. And ladies and gentlemen, I have another awesome guest with me today, Mr. Gil Griffin, all the way out from California. Gil, how you doing, sir?
Doing well, hanging in there.
Awesome, awesome. So, Gil is actually quite a very famous person, if at least in my opinion. Gil, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself outside of footy?
Well, outside of footy, here in San Francisco, I'm a mild-mannered high school teacher. But for some reason, in Australia, people know me there. I've written a book called Jumping at the Chance, which is right here. Came out in 2016, and it's the journey of the first born and bred American athletes ever to play AFL. And by athletes, it's not just the men, but women also. I wrote about Mason Cox, Jason Holmes, Alexander Oricchio, Eric Wallace, and some other of the men, and then also a couple of ladies, Katie Klatt and Kim Hemingway, who used to play in the USAFL. And they played in the first ever AFL sanctioned match for women that American women were playing in. And they played opposite each other. Katie played for GWS, and Kim played for Sydney. And that, by the way, the American version is right here. And in this American version, Mason Cox's debut, his historic debut in the Anzac match, is in there, as well as a foreword that I write appealing to American fans to give AFL a go.
Awesome, and that's crazy that you're famous down in Australia for writing a book, and I happened to see that, and I thought that was really cool. But other than the book, I gotta ask, how does a guy, how did you find footy? Like before you became a writer, before you took this opportunity, and now as a high school teacher, how did you find footy?
I found it in high school, and it was probably after a Mets game that my father and I went to. And you remember this from the '80s, that to have cable TV back then was some kind of status symbol, believe
Mhm.
it or not. And so my father had ESPN. We'd come back from a Mets game, and I stayed up entirely much later than I should have on a summer night. And I turned over to ESPN. And on ESPN, I see this sport unfolding, and I see a big, wide field, and I see these guys running around with what look to be basketball uniforms, and they've got mullets, and there are these big goalposts with no crossbar, and this ball that kind of looks like an American football but isn't. And I see people in these lab coats and hats, and they're going around pointing, and I see toilet paper coming down from the stands. And it was all I could think of, that I wasn't hallucinating. I really wondered what in the world I was watching. And then when it said Australian, that got me interested, because if you remember in the '80s, back then, Men at Work were dominating the top 40 charts, and I loved their music.
Mhm.
Mad Max and the Road Warrior movies were popular. You had the Come and Say G'day campaign from Paul Hogan. And Australia had always fascinated me anyway, because as a little boy, I remember seeing the ads on TV for Qantas,
Mhm.
and seeing the koala bear, but in an American accented voiceover. It sounded really fun. It's like, please don't fly Qantas to Australia. And it was like the first environmental ad ever on. It was totally ironic. And I really was thinking that so much about Australia was really cool. I mean, here was a national airline, the only national airline in the world besides Qatar Airways, that has a Q for its name. And then I figured out Qantas was an acronym,
Mhm.
and it just seemed like Australia was so far away and was so interesting, and its history is so similar to the United States, both in bad ways and in good ways. But anything and everything Australian was really fascinating to me too. I also remember the Foster's oil can uh, beer when that became popular. So when I saw it, it had my attention.
Mhm.
And then when I went to Australia in 1999, I was planning my first trip there. It was a solo trip. And I just knew that I wanted to see a live sporting event, because, like you, I love live sports. But there was only one sport that I wanted to see, and it was Australian rules football. And it just so happened, and this is where I think the footy gods were sort of directing my path, because it just so happened that the last full day in Australia I was going to spend was round one, 1999. And I happened to be in Sydney. But here's the crazy thing. I went on the AFL website, and it took me 5 days to figure out that the word fixture means
Mhm.
schedule. I couldn't figure that out, because I'm thinking, where's the schedule here? How am I going to figure out who's playing what? And then finally I decided to click on fixture, and it was this aha moment. And then I see everything. And back then, I was a news reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune, and I wrote some sports pieces. And so I just got a hold of the Sydney Swans media department, and they arranged for me to have a credential for that match at the SCG against Port Adelaide in round one. Dug a little deeper and found out that Tony Lockett, Plugger, was really into the chase for Gordon Coventry's record. And I'm thinking, this is perfect. This is newsworthy. It's topical. I can be there. And as soon as I came back after watching that round one match, I was hooked. And I just knew I had to watch more of it. And it was kind of like, where have you been all my life?
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of a common story with a lot of common thought with a lot of people. It's like I see it all the time in YouTube reactions and stuff like that. They're like, "I've never seen this sport," and I'm like, "That's because it's not as popular, just because of the time frame." But that's so cool. It's such a great story, and I know we had kind of talked off camera that you found out that I'm a huge Swans fan. So kind of going from that. Those of us that are watching the YouTube version of this might actually kind of already know this answer, but I gotta ask, what's your club?
Well, you'd never know it from, there might be something in my man cave here that might give me away. And then, I do have voices that come and talk to me, like Johnny here, Johnny Docker, who I liberated from a memorabilia store in Melbourne. And, I just saw Johnny in this glass cage, and I was just like, you know what? I need to bring him home. I need to bring him home. So here's Johnny Docker, sitting alongside Mr. Met over here. And so, yeah, the footy gods ordained it, that after 4 years of wandering in the footy wilderness and not having a club, that Fremantle would be my club. And I can even take you to that moment. It was the Derby, round 23, 2003. We've got to win this match to get into our first final ever. And I'm watching on the couch in San Diego, and I was a little bit familiar with Freo's history. I had been in Fremantle for the first time in 2000, a few weeks after the demolition derby with West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure, like you, I'm a baseball fan. And, in baseball, I cheer for these guys. I was born and raised partly in New York. So I am definitely a Mets fan. I don't go for the evil empire, the other team across town. So when I knew that Fremantle were playing West Coast, I knew enough to know that West Coast, like the Yankees, they were the dominant club in Perth,
Mm-hmm.
and that Fremantle, like the Mets, the expansion team, kind of like treated like the stepchild. There was no doubt who I was going to barrack for. But what I didn't expect was that by the end of that night, I would be jumping off the couch cheering for Freo. And I can tell you exactly the moment where it hit me. It was when Paul Medhurst, who went on to bigger things at Collingwood, he was a forward pocket, and he came upon a loose ball and he fumbled it. He even fell down. And I just thought to myself, oh my God, this is just like Freo to blow this opportunity. But then he straightened up, picked the ball up, and he snapped it across his body. It went through, and that sealed the match. And when Medhurst came off, he was like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself doing exactly the same thing. And I literally, like you hear heavenly music, like the start of The Simpsons,
Mm-hmm.
I heard that go off. And I said, this is your club. This is who you're supposed to be barracking for, because this is the first time that you have felt an emotional pull of a club, and you cannot turn your back on that.
That is an amazing story. That is absolutely awesome. So I think I think my next question might kind of already been answered, but I still gotta ask this. Is I like finding out, how would you describe your fandom for the Dockers? I mean, would you consider that? I mean, like I said, for some people, the context of die hard is kind of having a negative connotation. But I mean, how would you express your fandom? I mean, are you one of those that you get up and you watch every game live, or can you go to bed and watch it on replay on the Watch USAFL app? I mean, kind of what's your fandom for the Dockers?
You got to fit me with a purple straitjacket. I am all in. Ross Lyon, when he was our coach, preached the whole thing about being anywhere, anytime. That is how I am. I've missed one game in the last how many years now? In the last 8 or 9 years
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't watched live. So I always watch live. I love chatting with the fans on Twitter and having it go back and forth. Also, I read the West Australian every day on my phone, free, which is really cool. Press Reader, the Press Reader app, which our library here in San Francisco provides to us. It's great, and I've met some of the writers that do the work they do for the West. Also, occasionally, I will call into 6PR radio in Perth and get on the talkback show after the match. And I'm sure it kind of freaked a lot of people out to hear someone with an American accent talking footy. But not only that too, another really big thing is that our AFLW team, which of course unbeaten last year, and really, really, really excited about our team this year and a chance to chase a premiership. And that's really important too, because I think if you're going to support a club, you got to support both genders. You got to support the club all the way. And I have been to a couple of matches at Freo. I've been to a couple in Optus Stadium back in 2018 and been to one in 2015 in Subi. But the biggest expenditure I ever made was 2013. I flew down for the grand final, our one and only grand final appearance. And I was fortunate. I had enough frequent flyer miles to get from LA, where I was living at the time, to Melbourne one way. And I just could not attend. I had to be there. I felt it. I really felt, I was that confident that in August, I booked the one way and I said, you know what, if we don't make it this year, I'll just book it for the next year. And then, so I went back in 2014 and I went back in 2015. And one of the funniest things happened. 2014, I decided to show up at Brownlow night at Crown Casino, right? And I'm seeing all the players and coaches walk down the carpet. And here comes Ross Lyon, who's our coach then.
Oh boy.
And I said, oh, I got to meet him. And so, so I said to Ross Lyon, I said, hey, I just want you to know, I'm a huge Dockers fan. I'm from the States. And I came all the way down here thinking that we would be in it again. He looks at me and he's like, oh, you gave great effort.
That is awesome.
It was fantastic. And then the next year, of course, I was in Freo, and he recognized me because, I mean, seriously, how often is an Australian Football League coach going to run into an African American fan 10,000 miles away? So he was excited to meet me then the next year. And I'd written a column for the Dockers website in 2013. So yeah, so I am all in all the time. I even stayed up to the middle of the night watching the draft, even though it was a school morning. I must have stayed up until about 4 a.m. watching the draft, which took entirely too long. But hey, these are the kinds of things you do for your club.
Yeah, and that's absolutely awesome. In that interaction with Ross Lyon, everything that I've heard from him, that is so him, which is absolutely awesome.
Well, except you don't want to be around him when we lose, as I found out really quick, because he can forget who you are when you lose, and he can also tear your head off if you ask the wrong question. And I happened to be in the media post-match presser after a round one loss in 2016 against the Western Bulldogs, which I went to in Etihad Stadium. And, I remember after he had done his thing, I thought, oh, I can say hello to him. He remembers me. So I was like, Ross, hey, sorry about today, but good to see you again. And he just did not even look at me. He kind of rolls his eyes and said, cheers, and just walked by. I'm like, oh my God, dude. Wow.
Yeah, he's definitely a character, and definitely one of those fiery guys, especially when he doesn't. I've heard so many interesting stories about him. So that's awesome. And you kind of already approached a question that I always like asking, and I love hearing that, is that your love for the AFLW too. So you kind of already answered it. I mean, are you one of those? It's the same thing. You watch the games live and all of that,
Yeah.
and kind of keep an eye on that and everything like that.
Absolutely. I can remember last year, my wife and I were down in San Jose at this really well-renowned Chinese dumpling house. And I said, okay, honey, I'll treat you to dinner, but we better get our asses back home because my girls are playing and I'm not missing that. So I can remember we sped up the Interstate 280 to get back home so I could watch the girls. And, and it's just so funny because some of the differences between women's footy and men's footy are just really compelling. I mean, the bonding is different. The way that the way that the girls will celebrate a goal different from the boys. The fact that it's 16 on 16, and also some of these women haven't been able to play when they were kids because of this cutoff age that was going around in Australia. And thankfully, that's all over and done with, because I can't
Mm.
imagine not being told that I can't play the sport I love because of my gender. There's something really wrong with that, and I'm glad that they fixed it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, and it's just funny because I've interviewed a few of the Dockers women for another project that hopefully I'm going to be bringing to fruition. But it's interesting to hear them talk about it, to talk about how they celebrate little successes, and that they really look at a goal as a team effort and not an individual effort. That you don't see a whole lot of individuals celebrating with the women as you do with the men.
Hmm.
And that they really recognize it as teamwork. And the other thing too, just as a teacher of girls, being a high school teacher, one of the things I'm really happy about is that I teach a class called Pacific Rim Cultural Studies, and I spend a week on Australian history, going all the way back to the Chukurpa, the Dreamtime, all the way until now. And one of the things that I do, I devote one day to footy, and we watch AFL Explained. But for years, I had nothing to show the girls in my class who would be really interested. So one of the things that I do now is I show them the documentary film that was made about the Adelaide Crows Premiership, the first year that the league happened when Beck Goddard was coaching them.
Hmm.
And I even got one girl who wrote an essay about Aaron Phillips. And I was just so moved by that. And I think, and it's really, it just means a lot to me too, that the girls in my class can see that I'm interested in women's sport and
Hmm.
want to advance women's sport and want to tell them, hey, you know what? If you have this dream, there's no reason why you can't chase your dream. And that's one of the things I've talked about with the women players. That's been so fun to hear, is that they now have little girls coming up to them after matches asking for autographs and saying, "Wow, I want to be you one day." So that is really cool. And another thing I have to admit, I can tell you this, I am our school's assistant baseball coach.
Hmm.
And one of the great things about that is, with baseball, it's one of the only sports where the coaches wear the same gear as the players.
Hmm.
So when it came time for me to pick a uniform number last year, well, I picked number 27 in honor of Gemma Houghton.
Awesome. That is absolutely amazing. And I'm the same way. I mean, I took over coaching last year for the Des Moines Roosters, and we had 6 women start playing. And I told a lot of people, I said, I think it's really, really important for coaches, even of male dominated sports, to try to help women advance in athletics, and especially seeing the AFLW start to grow, and just the numbers. Like, I've heard statistics in most of the provinces where, now that women's footy is out there, they're growing 2, 3, 400%
Yeah.
each and every year, just because of the fact the AFLW is on. And I know it'll take a while, and the skill set is developing, because of the fact that they had the cutoff age at 12 for the longest period of time, as they would have to go into netball or
Yeah.
tennis or different stuff like that. So now, having these girls be able to get the coaching from 12 to 16, to the point where they can now start getting into the draft, is that in the next 5 years, the footy in the AFLW is only going to get better and
Yeah.
better each and every draft class. So I'm really looking forward to it. And
Yeah.
myself, unfortunately, the Swans do not have a license yet. I'm crossing my
Right.
fingers in the next couple of years they do, but I will definitely be keeping an eye on a lot more this year. I joke with a lot of people. I said I'm a kind of a free agent fan this year, and until the Swans get their own team. But
I hear
I
you.
will I will
Yeah.
definitely be keeping an eye on it. I definitely plan on using it, if not the Donnie's disposals, as a way to continue to promote the AFLW. So all right. So now we've got our AFLW part, which is absolutely awesome. And ladies, I hope you enjoyed that.
And I hope in
Now,
the next 5 to 10 years that we'll move. And just one quick thing, I hope in the next 5 to 10 years we can also get to a point where women can do this 24/7, 365, and
bro,
that can be their
exactly.
career. They won't have to have other jobs. And also, even minor, or things that may appear minor, even the gear. I
Hmm.
mean, the fact that they're wearing boots that are detrimental to their knees,
Hmm.
there needs to be some equipment made to support a woman's anatomy and
Hmm.
her legs and knees, so that you won't get those kinds of injuries.
Hmm.
So I did read about one AFLW player who was at the forefront of trying to work with some shoe manufacturers to try and make that happen.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I mean, it has to go all the way, where women are accorded things like comprehensive health care,
Hmm.
and being able to have it as a full-time profession. Because can you imagine if we get to a point where the women in the league can be professional footy players year round,
Hmm.
and can practice year round and can train year round and have that infrastructure and help, that would be incredible.
Yeah, and the coaches too, especially with the
Yeah.
coaching, because sometimes I think in women, even in coaching, it's a lot harder for them in
Oh
many
yeah.
situations. So going from the AFLW, we'll go back to the AFL or AFLM, as some people say. I'm not going to
Right.
get into that debate. Um, Favorite player currently for the Dockers, and then do you have an old timey? Have you? I definitely know you probably have been through the history since you've been a fan for so long. Kind of one of your favorite old Dockers.
Okay. As far as current goes, it would have to be at this point Michael Walters, son.
Hmm.
Um, I love his emotion. I love his creativity. I love the fact that he can fly sometimes for those speckies. He's a real leader, and I also have to admit I'm partial to a couple other people because Hayden Young looks like one of my students. He's such a young kid and
Hmm.
he kind of looks like this surfer guy. And I was like, okay, I've taught kids like that. I've taught boys like that. He looks like somebody that would be in one of my classes. And
Hmm.
then also, I got to be honest and tell you that it meant a lot to me to see Michael Frederick because
Hmm.
his ancestry is Southern Sudanese.
Hmm.
And looking at him, I was like, oh my God, this looks like this could be my son running around.
Hmm.
And and also we just drafted a young boy, Brandon Walker,
Hmm.
who is of Ghanaian ancestry. So those guys, also Adam Chera, I've actually played kick to kick with Ches.
Hmm.
Um, Nat Fife is just Superman, taking marks. You know, what is it? What is Superman? What was this thing? Leaping tall buildings in a single bound.
Hmm.
I once said that Nat Fife could outmark God. He is that much of a contested mark beast, and I love the way that Matt Taberner's come along too.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as old timey Dockers, um, I mean, how could you not love Matthew Pavlich?
Hmm.
Being a Mets fan, to me, he's like our Tom Seaver. It's the franchise. I got to meet Pav once, and that was great when I met him. And he's just such a classy individual.
Hmm.
And also the Wizard Jeff Farmer. I have a jumper with the Wizards number 33 on the back. Um, and also, I would have to say, in those years from 2012 through 2015, the best period of time in Freo history, my favorite, undisputedly, was Hayden Valentine. I
Hmm.
love ballads because he just loved to stir stuff up and get under opponent's skin. And, and he made All Australian in 2014. Just loved watching him play. And I don't think there will ever be another one like him. And I think that spirit is something that we kind of need at the club.
Hmm. Yeah, and I still remember sometimes in the explanation videos, Hayden Valentine being talked as like he was like 5'6" or 5'7". So he may be small in stature, but he definitely played bigger than he really was. So kind of going off of he's kind of going off of that. You kind of discussed a lot of names there, and that's really really awesome. I mean, I could probably do the same thing with my Swans a little bit. Just kind of, what were your thoughts on last season? I know there was some knocks on Freo being a defensive team and being so defensive, and I think so many people nowadays are like, we have to increase scoring, and it's kind of one of the things that always frustrates me with my coaching background is that I see the beauty in a good defensive game. Maybe I'm weird like that, but I love a good defensive game. So kind of what were your thoughts on last season's Dockers team?
Well, I love the cultural change that Justin Longmuir brought. I'm a real big fan of what he brought because if Ross Lyon was kind of like a father figure to the guys, then Justin Longmuir is like the cool older brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I love the fact that he's had experience in defensive coaching and offensive coaching at Collingwood. And it just really seemed like when he got there that there was a breath of fresh air that happened. And I love the faith that he put in the young players.
Mm-hmm.
That Andrew Brayshaw and Adam Chera had already served their apprenticeships, if you will, playing on other parts of the ground, and now it's time to throw them in the midfield. Look at Caleb Sarong, who won the
Mm-hmm.
Rising Star. The fact that he slotted into the team in the first few weeks, and had a really prominent midfield role. Michael Frederick got a lot of games. There was a lot of faith put in Lockie Schultz to be that small forward that goal sneak and play that role. And I really love that he really backed in the young guys. And the other thing too, he really established a culture too that if you weren't going to put the team first
Mm-hmm.
and if you were not going to buck up, or as they like to say in Australia, head down, bum up,
Mhm.
that you were out of there. And I know that, it's been controversial. I think, you might have read the article that I read about Freo's trading Jesse Hogan.
Mhm.
But I thought that was a bold move. That here's someone that was a hometown guy that they brought in, who had achieved stardom at another club, but never lived up to it at Freo. And it was really clear to me, anyway, that he wasn't putting the team first, and that he really was putting his own interests first. And granted, he did deal with injury. There were some mental health issues and all that, but that was a brave call to ship out someone that the team had moved heaven and earth to bring in, but didn't live up to it.
Mhm.
And I would rather take my chances with young guys learning the game. And I think we're going to be a lot better off with someone who is young and hungry, rather than someone that wanted to see himself as the focal point. And so I really applaud Justin Longmuir for all of that. And it's his team now. And I think the players recognize that. I think the fans are really behind him. And that's what we really want to see. And the skills also really improved, because that was sorely needed.
Mhm.
So I really, really think that Justin Longmuir did very well. And if you look at the last 13 matches Fremantle had, we were 6-7. And
Mhm.
it's very interesting, that 6-7, because I remember in Ross Lyon's first season, there was a point in the year the Dockers were 6-7. The rest of the way, 8-1, and made the finals. And I have to say that I really think, based off what I saw in that second half of 2020, I really believe that it's going to be, we're on the cusp of another 2012, of really making a run at finals. I
Mhm.
really believe that.
Yeah, and I'm one of those, just seeing the youngsters come along for your club, and I've chatted with several different Frio fans. I honestly think Frio is definitely one of those teams you could see getting into the eight next year. With they were kind of quiet in the off season. And it's one of the things that I noticed was that Jesse Hogan was really the only deal that they did, and then draft night they were very active. So I got to ask for you, the off season, again, moving Jesse Hogan, we had kind of already discussed the draft. I mean, do you, with their off-season moves, are you encouraged? Do you go into next year thinking finals? Or are you kind of one of those, you don't want to put expectations because you just don't know how COVID's going to play and how the team's going to go? You never know about injuries. Kind of, what are your thoughts with everything that's happened in the off season next
Okay,
year?
I'm definitely thinking finals. I think that one of the things that I wanted to see come about last year was to be 500, to win
Mm-hmm.
as many as you lose, and to build that as a start. But I think the last 13 games, we were very close to it. And I think if you look at the younger guys that are coming into the side, I think this year finally we're at a point where we're developing a lot of depth. And I think if you look at guys like Brandon Walker, you look at Joel Western from the Next Generation Academy, those guys are going to factor in, I think, later on in the piece. But I was really interested in them grabbing Josh Tracy from Country Victoria, a person that I hadn't heard of and many of our fans hadn't heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take a look at the vision, he's a big, strong guy, and even one recruiter likened him to a possible second coming of Jonathan Brown, which is a lot of pressure to put on him.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see that that the team is thinking that speed is the really important thing, and maybe grabbing one tall forward, because in years
Mm-hmm.
past it seemed like every tall forward who even had an inkling of leaving was linked to us.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go all the way back and think about when Frio tried to recruit Jack Revolt, or when they tried to recruit Travis Cloak, or when
Mm-hmm.
they were trying to recruit anybody that could have been a foil with Matthew Pavlich down there in the goal square.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, though, improving that outside run is really going to be important. And it's interesting to see Matt Taberner have a career year last year. And Rory Lobb had a bit at the end where he kind of had the yips and lost his radar, and you
Mm-hmm.
hope that he's back. But those two guys took a lot of contested marks,
Mm-hmm.
and they were really powerful up forward. And to me, it's almost like this: when the Chicago Bulls had that era of dominance, they didn't have a big center. They didn't have a big dominating center the way that the Lakers had Shaquille O'Neal, but they got by because they had a Michael Jordan and they had other pieces to fit that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of think that if Frio are to develop a really good small core, small forward core,
Mm-hmm.
and one dominant person inside, that it might lead to some success. I mean, think about it this way. I haven't even talked about Liam Henry. And
Mm-hmm.
Liam Henry, from all accounts, is a star waiting to happen. And he didn't get many games last year, but he's still very young. He's put on some size,
Mhm.
and maybe this is his coming out year, the way that it was for Caleb Sarong.
Yeah, and just I honestly, when moving Hogan was really good because he just did not seem to fit that team at all. And then with all the youth that you had, and then a very good draft, I think you brought in some really solid guys that I think they may not make instant impact, but they're definitely going to be guys that are going to make an impact eventually. And the fact that you get your next gen academy player, you get really good value at the draft picks that you did. Like I really like I see you all the time on Twitter. You're an amazing follow, especially. I think you can tell there's a lot of positivity coming out of Dockerland, definitely.
Definitely.
Um,
And one thing also that people don't even mention, you mentioned the defense. I mean, well, our back line was decimated last year, but look how well it stood up, because
oh
this
yeah.
year we've got Joel Hamling coming back, Alex Pierce, who twice has been on the cusp of being an All-Australian before injuries derailed his seasons. You got him coming back. So suddenly, you've got two twin towers coming back. There's going to be a lot of competition in that back line,
Hmm.
because we also have Griffin Logue coming back.
Hmm.
Brennan Cox really stood up and broke through and did really well. Talon Duman was really impressive back there. So there is a lot to like. And the back line, really, as far as the spine goes, might be the strongest point. But there's a lot to like in the midfield. But it
Hmm.
just seems like the forward line is always the one with the question mark, and so you just have to hope that Taberner will build on what he did last year.
Hmm.
Rory Lobb will rediscover his radar, and maybe Liam Henry has a breakout year. Sonny Walters, you can count on him through the midfield and up
Hmm.
forward, and moving that Fife up forward more. When you have that stronger midfield, you allow Fife to go forward more
Hmm.
and take those contested marks, and we could have a very potent scoring side that we haven't had in many years.
Yes, and the other thing too is with moving Fife forward, you can save his body a little bit because sometimes
Yes.
with his style, sometimes he is sometimes a little bit injury prone. So moving him forward maybe takes a little bit off of his body a little bit, maybe makes him last a little bit longer, and especially going back to a 22 game season, full 20-minute quarters. I think in the long run that actually might be better for his career to maybe move him a little bit more forward, a little less time in the midfield, maybe a 30% of the midfield, 70% forward. I think you'll save his body in the long run, and then he can save a little bit more for those late games. And Sonny Walters is probably one of the best clutch kickers right now in the game.
Yeah.
How many times has he had the ball in his hand with a chance to win it, and he wins it? So,
And he nearly brought us back in that grand final in 2013. If we had just
mhm.
kicked straight,
Yeah.
we'd be having our first flag. But I remember that. I remember that he kicked that real long range goal that he should have been kicking 10 meters out, because I remember Brian Lake whacked him in the jaw. And but I'm not bitter or anything.
No,
Anyway,
not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
and I
Uh,
and I just forgot that match. I never think about it anymore.
yeah. Sometimes those losses in the grand finals, you almost want to have selective amnesia. But
Yeah.
oh yeah. So
Although that
kind of.
wasn't the worst loss for me. That
Oh
was not
no.
my most disappointing Freo loss. You know what it was? The most disappointing loss to me ever as a Dockers fan had to be the 2015 prelim final at home against Hawthorn,
Hmm.
because we had such a great year that year. We started 9-0, and you know we were just dominant for the first half of the competition, but then we ran out of steam. And I remember there was one really controversial decision that I really wish we had made differently,
Hmm.
which was Ryan Crowley was suspended, as you remember, for most all of that year um, for the for the uh, for the drugs that were found in the painkiller that he
Hmm.
was using for his back.
Gotcha.
I would have played Ryan Crowley in the preliminary final, and I would have had him as the sub. And it's
Hmm.
interesting, he would have gone to Sam Mitchell. And I'm not saying that we would have won that match,
Hmm.
but clearly Sam Mitchell had a huge influence in that
Hmm.
match. But for me, I looked at that match and I thought, okay, we're finally going to vanquish our nemesis on our home soil. We're going to beat Hawthorn. We're going to get to the grand final, and even bigger, we're going to play a Derby grand final. And
Hmm.
I would have just been off my brain, because I did go to Melbourne that year. And I thought,
Hmm.
wow, I've never been to a Derby. How many people out there can say that their first Derby was a grand final Derby?
Hmm.
And to me, that would have just been the sweetest thing in the world. Beating Hawthorn, getting revenge on them, and then beating West Coast in the grand final. But it's so funny, because if you look back at 2015, there was one match that really turned our fortunes. And it was the second derby of that year
Mm-hmm.
when West Coast woke up and they demolished us in that match. And we have not beaten them since that. So it's just interesting that you can look for moments in a franchise and look at it as a seismic moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really think from that point, yeah, we did win a qualifying final against Sydney. We didn't score very much, but that was an indicator of trouble, I
Mm-hmm.
thought.
Okay. So going from let's kind of turn around from the negative to the positive here. One of my favorite questions that I always love asking every episode, and it's usually one of the last questions I ask, is going from one of the worst losses to what was one of your favorite games that you've ever seen? Doesn't have to be a Dockers game, but if it is, which I'm pretty I don't think I'm going off too big of a limb that it probably is. What's your favorite game you've ever seen of AFL?
Okay, that would have to be the 2013 prelim final
Hmm.
when sorry about this when we beat Sydney. And
No
I
problem.
remember, yeah, my wife and I couldn't watch in the same house.
Oh boy.
And luckily I have a mate who shares who I have a mutual birthday with,
Hmm.
who is a mad Dockers supporter. He's from the Wheat Belt in WA, from Miling, and we had met that summer, and we just worked it out that he lived in Orange County, California, which for you Aussies listening is about a 40-mile drive south of LA. So I don't know how to convert, maybe 79 kilometers, something like that. So
Hmm.
anyway, I drove down there, and the match started at 2:40 a.m. Local time, and so his wife and his kids were sort of sequestered in this other room,
Hmm.
doors locked and everything, and we're doing all we can not to just go completely crazy watching the match. And I just remember, from the moment the boys ran out of the tunnel, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, please, Freo fans, please be loud, please be loud, let these guys know you're behind them. And I felt it. It's like I felt this vibration
Hmm.
from the screen. I was like, okay, all right, we're on, we're doing this. And, you know, it's really interesting because I mentioned the Mets before, and really understanding that as a Mets fan, we've had a lot more disappointment than success.
Hmm.
But when we have success, we really just go over the top in celebrating our success. And Fremantle fans are the same way, I've
Hmm.
discovered. When I went to Subiaco Oval in 2015 and hearing them and being among them, I was like, wow, they're like Met fans, very knowledgeable, very loud, very passionate. And so, I really felt that all the way in the States. And it just seemed like every step in the positive direction was a vindication for all those years that we had been frustrated. And I just remember too, um, late in the match, and I still watch it. And I remember when Hayden Valentine's goal goes through, this over the shoulder spectacular goal that he kicks, and the umpire calls for a score review, and it totally interrupts the euphoria. But in a way,
Hmm.
I'm glad it did, because as soon as we got the official signal that it went through, I don't think I've ever heard a crowd that loud. I mean,
Hmm.
they were just absolutely insane. And I remember that night also reminded me when I was at a Mets game in 2006, when the Mets clinched the National League Eastern Division Championship, and we hadn't won anything in 6 years. And I just remember the Freo fans chanting MCG, MCG. And I was just thinking, God, we're so excited. We don't even know what to chant. We don't even know what to do with ourselves. And I just remember being so excited after we won and just thinking, when the moment that final siren went off, damn, I'm on a plane 3 days from now,
Hmm.
and I'm going to be living the dream, seeing my boys. And I just remember walking from Fed Square to the MCG in this river of purple. Everyone's wearing purple, and it's like we took over the town. And I remember celebrating. There's a pub called the Great Northern in the
Hmm.
Carlton section of Melbourne, and I went in there and I met a whole bunch of people from the Big Footy page, the Dockers Big Footy page, and it was so nice to be among family, to be among Dockers fans. I couldn't buy a beer if I wanted to. They were just like, no, we got this, mate. No worries, mate. I'll shout you. And so it was the coolest thing, and to be among everybody was just it was unbelievable. and
Hmm.
and to think that it sprung from that particular match. And then if you ask me about another one, the match that led up to that, the quarterfinal or the qualifying final win at Geelong, where no
Hmm.
one thought we were going to win. And the miraculous hit out of Aaron Sandilands, and Stephen Hill
Mhm.
comes from nowhere off the bench and sprints down the field, our fastest player at the time, and just sent us into the home prelim. That was just unbelievable. That really was.
Yeah, and they're so vivid. Everyone that I talk to, like that game, the one game that you always love is so vivid. You can almost in the back of your head like call the entire game. It's just so cool. And that's such a great thing. I've had stories all the time about that, which is absolutely awesome. Gil, this has been absolutely an amazing conversation. I mean, you've had such a
Me too.
privileged situation to be able to go to Australia, to write articles, to meet so many of these awesome players. I mean, even before we were on, we talked some stories about that. It was absolutely cool. Um, since you do have a book, you're one of the few people that's got a publication. Would you like to tell people how to get a hold of your book? Um,
Yeah.
if you want to shout out your Twitter handle, so then if there's other Docker fans that somehow don't know you, they can get a hold of you, or any U.S. Australian rules fans that want to follow, which I will definitely say he is definitely worth a follow. If there's a Freo game on, he is definitely a very interesting follow. I will say that. So,
Well,
floor is yours.
yeah, cheers. And you know what? If you can stomach American politics and stomach my very pointed takes on American politics, I'm independent. I'm not a member of a political party, but I do believe that I have common sense about
Mm-hmm.
what works and what doesn't work. So, anyway, my Twitter handle is at Gil Writes Here, and that's Gil with one L. Gil Writes, Writes here. So, that is my Twitter handle. I'd love to be in contact with some people. As far as the book goes, you American folks watching this, my fellow Americans, this is Jumping at the Chance, and it's the U.S. version, and it comes with an explainer of the game, and also comes with a foreword with an appeal to American fans to pick up this great game that we all love so much. For you Aussies out there, you may still be able to get a copy of this book online, Jumping at the Chance. And as I was saying earlier, I wish this was me posing. I don't know how much, I don't know if they're going to see the Zoom or whatever. But anyway, it's this very in shape brother right here holding up a footy with his finger. And I wish that were me, but it isn't. Um, but is Jumping at the Chance, from NBA hopefuls to AFL prospects. The American version is Jumping at the Chance, from the court to the field, how NBA hopefuls are changing Australian rules football. Also, last thing, got to give a shout out to Rowan Connolly, the former chief football writer at The Age in Melbourne, because he started a really fantastic website called footyology.com.au, which I'm a regular writer for. There's some fantastic writers, including um, a very dear friend and mentor of mine, Martin Flanagan,
Mm-hmm.
who is a longtime writer for The Age. He also wrote the foreword to my book. I'm proud to say that I've actually hung out with this man at his home in Tasmania, and we still keep in contact. And I love his writing because it is totally beyond footy. It's about life and everything else. And for those of you who are listening for the first time, who don't know much about Australian rules football, I guarantee you, you give this sport a chance, you will be hooked too. It is the greatest game on earth, as people like to say.
Completely agree, Kill. Completely agree. That is absolutely awesome. Um, again, thank you so much again for this awesome conversation. You're such a great storyteller. I can definitely tell your writing comes out, even how in your verbal communication is absolutely awesome. So I really, really appreciate this. We'll definitely have to sit down sometime. Maybe we'll preview a Freo game one time with you. You definitely be a great one to talk to. You have yourself a good evening, sir. And
You too.
Fourth and Long fans, this has been Donnie Hess with another interview, and y'all have a good night.